Canada's industry minister says tariffs on China will remain in place despite some concerns from the provinces. In October, Canada joined Washington in imposing 100% import taxes on Chinese electric vehicles.
Canada's bold move to protect its auto industry has sparked a chain reaction few anticipated. What started as a firm effort to curb the influx of inexpensive Chinese electric vehicles has spiraled into a broader economic challenge, sending shockwaves through multiple sectors. When China retaliated with steep tariffs on canola, one of Canada's most crucial agricultural exports, prairie farmers were blindsided. They suddenly faced the loss of a key income stream, just as the cost of farming was climbing. In Ottawa, optimism gave way to concern. Prime Minister Mark Carney began signaling a potential shift in direction, while Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly found herself caught between increasingly desperate farmers and anxious automakers. The focus has now shifted. It's no longer about who might win this trade war, but whether Canada can emerge from it without lasting damage to two of its most vital industries. A move once seen as a confident stand for economic sovereignty now teeters on the edge of crisis. At the end of 2024, Ottawa made headlines by imposing a 100% tariff on electric vehicles manufactured in China. The aim was to give Canadian automakers breathing room, to help domestic plants catch up in the global race to electrify, where China holds a dominant position. Policymakers argued that Chinese automakers owed much of their success not to innovation, but to massive government subsidies. Without some level of protection, they warned, Canada's auto sector might be overwhelmed before it had a chance to compete. Initially, the move was widely applauded as a bold display of national resolve. But in global trade, no action goes unchallenged. Within months, China responded with a wave of tariffs targeting Canadian agricultural exports. Among the hardest hit was canola, the signature crop of the Canadian prairies, which was slapped with tariffs as high as 75.8%. Beijing's counterpunch struck at the heart of farming communities, where millions depend on Chinese markets. A policy designed to defend the auto sector had instead inflicted deep wounds on agriculture. What had been framed as a step toward economic resilience suddenly looked like the start of a full-blown crisis. Confidence in Ottawa began to crack. The government held firm at first, insisting the tariffs were essential to modernizing the auto industry and keeping pace in the global technology race. But as 2025 progressed, the pressure became impossible to ignore. Farmers across the prairies began to raise their voices. Town halls were organized. Media appearances became frequent. They warned that without restored trade ties with China, the entire agricultural supply chain was at risk of collapse. The canola industry alone, worth over 40 billion Canadian dollars and employing more than 200,000 people, stood at the center of the storm. Under mounting pressure, even those who had once defended the tariff policy began to reconsider. Then came a surprising development. Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe made an unexpected visit to Beijing in an attempt to repair strained trade relations. At first, his actions drew criticism for potentially undermining Ottawa's stance. But soon after, Prime Minister Carney publicly supported Moe's efforts, an unmistakable sign that the federal government was rethinking its strategy. Not long after, Melanie Joly acknowledged that Ottawa was reassessing the tariff policy. She also hinted at expanded trade ties with countries like Japan, South Korea, and those in Europe to help offset the fallout. Agriculture Minister Heath MacDonald echoed this shift, emphasizing that adjustments to policy could be on the table if the situation demanded it. Gradually, Canada began shifting from a hardline approach to a more pragmatic one, focused less on projecting strength and more on damage control and long-term sustainability for both agriculture and automotive sectors. Meanwhile, the very industry the tariffs were designed to protect, Canada's electric vehicle market, began to feel the unintended consequences. Once considered a cornerstone of the country's green industrial strategy, the EV market saw a dramatic slowdown. By mid-2025, EV sales had dropped by nearly 40% year over year. New vehicle registrations plummeted from over 18% to below 9%. Car buyers faced rising prices, fewer choices, and dwindling incentives. British Columbia scrapped its EV rebate program entirely, and Quebec struggled to keep its own in place amid public backlash. Many EV models surpassed the federal price cap for rebates, pushing them out of reach for middle-class buyers, the very group expected to lead the shift to cleaner transportation. With Chinese automakers locked out of the market due to tariffs, consumers were left with fewer affordable, high-quality options. The result was a stalled EV transition and an increasingly frustrated public. Canada's path to its zero emissions goals began to falter. In response, the federal government quietly adjusted its 2026 climate targets and introduced temporary relief packages to help domestic automakers survive the downturn. What was once touted as a protective strategy had turned into a burden, dragging the economy backward. Yet among all the sectors affected, prairie farmers remain the hardest hit. Across Saskatchewan and Alberta, canola growers watched their primary market evaporate overnight. Beijing's 75.8% tariff not only erased profits, it effectively closed off access to the single largest buyer of Canadian canola. Prices for canola futures plummeted. Fears of an oversupply grew. Millions of dollars in unsold crops sat in silos as producers scrambled to find alternative markets. For rural communities, canola is more than just a commodity. It's a way of life, fueling local businesses, supporting families, and sustaining entire towns. In 2024, China had purchased nearly 5 billion Canadian dollars worth of Canadian canola. When that disappeared, the economic shock spread instantly across the prairies. Ottawa has pledged support, but for farmers on the ground, promises don't pay for fuel or move unsold grain. Agriculture Minister Heath MacDonald has spoken about possible aid packages, and Prime Minister Mark Carney has praised Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe's diplomatic outreach to Beijing. Still, frustration in rural communities has steadily turned into open anger. Many farmers now feel their livelihoods were sacrificed to protect the auto industry in Ontario. Prairie premiers have called for a relief package, but what producers truly want isn't just a payout, it's the return of their markets. The longer the trade standoff continues, the deeper the debt grows, the weaker trust becomes, and the more vulnerable the rural economy gets. What was meant to be a policy supporting domestic industry has instead created a rift, dividing the vast golden fields of the prairies from the steel assembly lines of Ontario. As trade tensions continue to escalate, Ottawa faces a tough decision: hold the line or compromise to de-escalate the crisis. A full rollback of tariffs could immediately inject life back into the economy, reopening the canola trade with China, lowering EV prices, and bringing some stability back to the auto market. But this solution comes with risks. Domestic industries, already under pressure from competition in the US and Asia, worry that a wave of cheap imports could wipe out fragile recovery efforts. If Canada stays the course, the consequences could be more severe: a prolonged slump in agriculture and a sharp drop in public confidence in the government's economic leadership. Amid all this, a middle ground solution has begun to gain traction, one that combines partial tariff reductions with strategic diversification. Under this approach, Ottawa could reduce tariffs on specific EV models while negotiating expanded export opportunities for Canadian agricultural goods. Some advisors have proposed using these tariff cuts as leverage, encouraging Chinese automakers to invest in Canadian manufacturing, which could lead to job creation and technology transfer. Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly has suggested this might be the most practical path forward. If Canada is going to make concessions, they should bring tangible economic benefits. But obstacles remain. Auto unions in Ontario fear that easing restrictions could shift jobs overseas. Skepticism about China's reliability runs deep, and opposition parties are quick to accuse the government of backing down. Still, even the harshest critics acknowledge the potential upside of compromise. Agricultural revenues could rebound in a matter of months. Consumers could regain access to affordable electric vehicles. And public trust in Canada's clean energy transition could be revitalized. Canada now stands at a crossroads. If the government sticks to its current approach, it may retain political capital, but at the cost of continued hardship across key sectors. If it pivots toward a more flexible policy, there's a chance to reclaim lost markets and revive the struggling EV industry. But that kind of shift will demand clear vision, bold leadership, and careful diplomacy. The line between protectionism and progress has never been thinner. The tariffs bought Canada time, but delivered few results. EV sales remain sluggish, factories are underperforming, and farmers are still facing steep losses. A smarter path forward could involve linking any tariff relief to strict conditions, restoring canola exports, securing foreign automaker investments in Canadian plants, and fostering technology partnerships. At the same time, Ottawa could deepen trade ties with countries like Japan and South Korea, helping reduce Canada's dependence on any one major trading partner. If managed carefully, this crisis could become an opportunity, a moment of industrial renewal that supports both farmers and factory workers. But if mismanaged, it will only deepen the divide between regions. From empty showrooms in Ontario to full grain bins in Saskatchewan, the pressure is mounting. And once again, the burden of decision lies with Ottawa. Will the government have the courage to shift course before the damage becomes irreversible? Since early 2025, relations between Canada and the United States have also hit a new low. What were once just inflammatory campaign trail remarks by President Donald Trump have turned into official policy, laced with provocation and insult. Trump didn't hold back. He openly mocked Canada, even going so far as to suggest it should become the 51st U.S. state. Soon after, his administration imposed sweeping tariffs of up to 35% on most Canadian exports, not to negotiate, but to punish. Adding fuel to the fire, the White House accused Canada of failing to stop fentanyl from entering the U.S., even though American intelligence agencies confirmed the drugs were coming from outside Canadian borders. Every statement and executive order seemed calculated to insult and isolate one of America's closest allies. For decades, the U.S.-Canada relationship was built on trust, cooperation, and open trade. Now, all of that is being tested. The insults mounted. The new tariffs began to leave visible scars on cross-border commerce. Initially, Trump's policies were touted as a show of strength. But soon, the economic pain began to seep southward. Americans started to feel the effects. The backlash in Canada was quiet at first, then grew louder. Tourism from Canada dropped sharply. Canadians, America's largest group of foreign visitors, began canceling travel plans, choosing to stay home or visit other countries instead. Outrage swept across Canadian provinces, from Ontario to British Columbia. As the boycott gained momentum, even some U.S. politicians began to push back. A Republican governor in Louisiana admitted the obvious. The tariffs have backfired. And the people getting hurt are Americans. By the time those words were spoken, the damage had already taken hold. The situation had spiraled beyond rhetoric into a full-blown economic and diplomatic crisis. Washington, once loud and assertive, is now quietly trying to reopen lines of communication with Ottawa. Behind the scenes, officials are working to restore diplomatic ties, carefully and without openly acknowledging any misstep. Whether this shift signals a true change of heart or just a strategic pause remains unclear. But one thing is undeniable: the U.S. now faces an uncomfortable reality. Many American officials are finding themselves in a position they didn't expect to travel to Canada, not just to negotiate, but possibly to apologize. And all of it began with a deceptively simple act. Millions of Canadians stopped spending money in the United States. The numbers speak for themselves. In 2024, Canadians made over 20 million visits to the U.S., spending more than $20 billion and helping support more than 100,000 American jobs. That money filled hotel rooms in Florida, kept border town shops open, and provided income for small businesses across dozens of states. But by the middle of 2025, that steady flow had nearly come to a halt. The number of Canadian visitors dropped by over a third in just a few short months. In June alone, arrivals had fallen 33% year over year. By August, road trips were down 34%, and air travel had plunged by more than 25%. Every percentage point lost translated into real consequences: empty hotel rooms, closed stores, and hundreds of millions of dollars in lost revenue. The U.S. had set out to punish Canada with harsh tariffs and inflammatory rhetoric. Instead, it ended up hurting itself. The tough talk didn't achieve its goals. Local economies, especially those dependent on Canadian tourists, began to suffer. Now, Washington is approaching Ottawa not with demands, but with a call for renewed dialogue. In an unexpected turn of events, the leverage has shifted. Canada now holds the upper hand. And until that changes, the silence at the border will speak louder than any statement from the halls of American power. If you'd like to stay updated on how this story unfolds, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the Timefold channel for more coverage.